Hello, welcome to this video. This is part 3 in my series about Supernatural Season 1. It's like 3 a.m. right now. I don't know why I'm filming this. Anyway, Episode 8, Bugs. I'm gonna be honest. I just watched this episode, and I don't really remember what happened, and also I skipped the last 10 minutes, and I was really bored. I was really bored. Before season 15 came out, this episode was the worst episode of Supernatural. Like, it held that title for 15 years. No other episode came close for a very long time. Until the finale. But so the horror in this episode was really just gross. Not gross like in skin, gross because bugs. And there wasn't much horror anyway. There wasn't like much action or anything. It was really just boring. We had some emotional conflict, and it's really just Dean being like, our dad did the best he could, and we should stick with our family because we love family, and blah 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 blah. And then Sam is like, no, you should be independent. You should do what you want because your life is yours. And both are valid points. Being independent is good, but being a part of a family is also good. We could dig a little deeper and see that Sam is arguing this way because he feels like his father is disappointed in him, and he feels like the way he was raised was unfair. And he says the only line of dialogue that I wholeheartedly agree with, quote, how we were raised was jacked, unquote. So that's Sam's argument. He thinks he was a kid. He should have gotten to be a kid. And that's great. Good for him. Dean, on the other hand, if we dig a little bit deeper about him, he has some emotional issues throughout this episode. Dean says a couple of things. Like, there's a comment where he says, wasn't that on Oprah? And Sam is like, you watch Oprah? And Dean just kind of doesn't answer and kind of sidesteps that and just keeps talking about what he was saying before. I mean, I don't know if you've seen Dean, but he looks very masculine. This is kind of touching on some aspects of his character where, and this is just my opinion, we see a lot of repression in Dean. He keeps everything inside, buried deep down under references and movies and music, and he packs it all down, and every time someone tries to dig it up, it's either avoidance, jokes, or anger. This develops more the longer you watch the show, but as it stands now, all we know about Dean is that he doesn't talk about real things very much. We see this in episode 2. I would say a little bit in episode 1 because he's very jokey, he's very quippy, but he does have to talk about real things because the whole point is for him to get Sam to come with him, and the only way he can get Sam to do that is if he tells the truth and is like, hey, our dad's missing and I need your help. But in episode 2, we get interactions with other characters who are not Sam, and Dean kind of shuts off, but not in the traditional way. It's more of a facade. It's definitely a mask that he puts on, and it's hard to see the first time through. The first time I watched this, I was like, oh, he's just like a fun, quippy, funny character. He makes references. He's a nerd, but like, he's got some stuff. I think we'll get to it down the line, but almost every Supernatural fan that I talk to, everyone says that Dean is like this because he's bisexual, and John is a homophobe, and Dean was never allowed to be bisexual, so he just represses it. He's very hyper masculine, and he was written that way on purpose. And the way Jensen Ackles plays him, it gives Dean a couple of dimensions that are not hypermasculine. And every time we get to see a little bit of the regular masculine or even feminine sides, the hypermasculine floods back in, and everything that is not hypermasculine gets repressed. So Dean doesn't have like a healthy masculinity. It's either hypermasculine or we don't get to see it because he's just so closed in on himself. And a lot of people saw this and related to this as bisexual because there's a lot of internalized homophobia that comes with being bisexual or loving a bisexual or dating or, whatever it is. Because if you date someone who's not your gender, you're always read as straight. And if you date someone who is your gender, you're always read as gay. And you can never be both. And people, sexualize you because you like both, so that means you want multiple partners. And that's not how it works. Sorry to break it to you, but yeah. So people read Dean as bisexual. I read Dean as bisexual also. I'm not saying that I don't. So anyway, this episode has some character moments between Dean and Sam. I do not like them, but they're sort of necessary. We get to see their dynamic and their arguments, and we get to see why Dean thinks he's right and why Sam thinks he's right. It doesn't really do anything in this episode. They just kind of have an argument because there's another character named Matt who is also baby Samandriel. We will get to that later. I'll remind you. But this kid, he's basically Sam, but before Sam's life fell apart. So there's like a running parallel, and then their dads are similar. So Sam really connects with Matt, and he's like, you need to be independent, and when you get to go to college, that's going to be the greatest time of your life. You get to get out of here and away from your crazy dad. And Dean is like, well, you should respect your dad because he's your dad, and family's important, man. I'd also like to note that Dean never says that Matt can't go to college. He just wants the family to be included. So, yeah. The premise of this episode is pretty cliche. It's like an old Native American burial ground, and there's like a curse, and they have to talk to this old, wise Native American dude. And that's cool, representation, but also at the same time, it's like playing right into the stereotypes of like old, wise Native Americans. He's kind of funny though, so I don't know. It kind of feels stereotypical to me. While the premise is a little cliche, it's very American. Anywhere else you go, there will never be a horror story based on a Native American burial ground. That is purely an American thing. We get our first, you guys are gay joke. It's alright. It's weird because they're brothers, and then it's also weird because, like, why is it funny that people think they're gay? Why is that something to laugh about? That makes me kind of upset, if I'm going to be completely honest. It's like, gay people are just people. The only reason we say gay people is to differentiate them from straight people. We could just say people. I don't know. That's just my opinion on it. Whatever. The end of this episode has plot again. I say plot because it's literally just, we're gonna talk about John for a couple of minutes. And then the episode ends. So, that's great. It's literally just Sam is saying, I want to find Dad. And Dean's like, me too. And Sam's like, I want to apologize to him for everything that I said. And and Dean's like, yeah, you could do that. You guys are just gonna fight immediately after, though. So, and then Sam is like, ha ha, probably. And then the episode ends. And it's like, what did that accomplish? Can you tell me why? It's like, oh, great. They're brothers. Okay, so I like these shots. My final thoughts for this episode. I have 4. This episode previously held the worst Supernatural episode title. I'd say now it's second. We all know what the real worst episode is. The family dynamics exposition between Sam and Dean is very ham-fisted in there. And I don't see how it relates to Bugs. The episode is not very well written overall, so it feels a little disjointed when they're like, oh, maybe there's bugs. I hate my dad. There's connective tissue. It's just so thin. I do like the parallels with Matt and Sam, but I don't like Sam, so the emotional moments in this episode just do not hit for me. Every time a character dies, I'm like, oh no, they're dead. Every time they discover something, I'm like, oh, cool, new information. Yeah, everything in this episode was just like, nah. Lastly, this episode's so skippable. Like, I tried to watch all of it. I skipped the part with the bees because it's so repetitive after a while. 45 minutes is a really long time. Not everything needs to be 45 minutes, CW. Just why? Why does it always have to be 45 minutes? Can you just shorten it a little? 30, 25. Like, there's a lot of stuff you could cut from this episode, and it would be basically the same. I wanted to skip this episode. As soon as I realized that it was this one, I wanted to skip it. I was ready to be done. This episode gets a D from me. Yeah, I didn't like it. It was bad. Episode 9, Home. So this episode starts out with a mom and her 2 kids and some supernatural stuff, obviously. So this mom moved into Sam and Dean's old house, the one that their mom died in, and some weird stuff is happening. Sam has a vision about the mom, which he initially lies about, but Dean, presses, and he's like, well, no, you need to tell me, or we're not going home. And Sam comes clean about Jess, and he says that he dreamt about her death in detail days before she died. And we also get to see that Dean has some trauma, obviously, from his mom's death, and he does not want to go back home. He says, and I quote, I swore to myself I would never go back there. I don't think he should go home. Again, in this moment, Sam feels too authoritative. He almost immediately convinces Dean to go back to Lawrence. You could argue that this is the youngest sibling gets away with anything kind of thing. It could be just because Sam's the younger brother, but he is the driving force for the plot at this moment. It feels like his word is law. So they get to Lawrence, and Sam's hunch turns out to be a hunch, and then it turns into a case. So Dean is like, yeah, let's do it. To the untrained eye, this could be Dean just seeing clues for a normal case, and his hunter brain is kicking in, and he just decides to go along and do the case because that's what he does. But if we want to look at something that's not just the superficial layer, we see Dean, he asks more questions, he realizes that this is a case, and then he takes a moment to, like, realize and contemplate that, and he kind of freaks out a little bit. I think Dean might have had a panic attack, but he was able to just pretend it wasn't happening. You can see him kind of like pull himself together and focus on the facts of their new case. And Sam confirms this for the audience. He's like, "This is just another case to you." And Dean kind of doesn't answer the question, but it's implied, at least to Sam, that Dean is saying, like, yeah, it's just a case. But Dean immediately leaves. Anyway, so they're like, "What should we do? What do we normally do with cases?" And they're like, "Well, we look into the history of the house." And they're like, "Well, we already know what happened this time." And Dean was 4 at the time of their mother's death, so he remembers a little bit more than Sam, who was 6 months old. So Dean talks about carrying Sam out of the door, and I think the way Jensen Ackles delivers the line, he says, "I remember the fire, the heat, and then I carried you out the door." The way he says it makes me think that Dean wanted to say something else. He wanted to articulate more, but it's just so painful that he literally had to be like, "Yeah, I remember the visceral feeling, and oh god, this makes me really panic, so I'm just gonna swerve and go right to the end, and now it's over and I'm done talking." I think Sam's face after Dean says that is the only thing that convinces me that he's the younger brother. Because Sam is like, "Oh, you never told me that." And Dean is like, "Oh, I didn't? Oh." Because I myself am a younger sibling. I'm the youngest of 4. There's a lot of us. The look on Sam's face, he captures the awe of great things that you don't remember. I don't want to praise Jared Padalecki, but he did act that moment pretty well. He got it. So after that moment, Dean closes off very visibly, and he avoids feeling his emotions and showing his emotions in front of Sam. And he just flees. And as someone who suffers from anxiety, this is a very key telling moment for me, because when I get anxious about something, I usually clam up and freeze or flee. And Dean picks the latter, and he escapes. And he does the one thing that he knows will work. He calls his dad. And his dad doesn't answer, so it's a voicemail. So Dean kind of breaks down, and he begs John for help. He says, "Please come get me. Mom, I'm scared." No, he says, "We're at home, and I could really use your help. I don't know what to do. Please help me, Dad." Which also brings me to my favorite shots of this episode, which are these. Yeah, I don't usually like close-ups of people's faces unless it's like a very good emotion, but the shots that I picked for this episode, they are moments that mean a lot to me and the characters. I wouldn't say beautiful moments, but they're memorable. So this episode is fairly tense. There happens to be a scene with a garbage disposal, and I don't know about you, but I'm a person who would never put my hand in a garbage disposal, even if it was unplugged and the power was off. I would never do that. So the plumber's everywhere. Why? The episode also resolves really quickly, so we can get a moment where Dean and Sam see Mary again. And I do want to note their reactions, which are extremely different. Dean is shocked to silence. Sam's reaction is very much shocked, but in a different way. He's still able to speak. He starts crying a little bit, and it's more just like you're here in front of me, and I miss you so much. Where Dean's reaction is, you're here in front of me, and I never thought I would see that ever again. So this episode introduces Missouri Mosley, and I love her. I think the only bit of characterization that we get is the stereotypical black character, and she's very sassy and funny, and it's like, alright. I mean, she injects life into the episode, so, like, I'm not gonna hate on her, but she's also the very stereotypical sassy black character. And she's the only black character that we've seen so far in these 10 episodes. So, but she's not a villain. She's not a villain. I think the only thing about her that I could pick up, other than the sassy, stereotypical stuff, is that she's a bad liar. She is a person who says what she's thinking. We just see that in her dialogue, the way she interacts with Sam and Dean. She shakes their hand and, like, immediately is like, oh, your father's missing. Oh, your girlfriend's dead. I'm so sorry. Also, she focuses mainly on Sam. Doesn't say anything about Dean, which makes me realize we know nothing about Dean pre-series. We know nothing about him at all. But she's a bad liar. We see this because at the very end of the episode, John appears for the first time since the pilot. And we have a little moment with him where he's just saying, I want to see my sons so bad, but I can't. Not yet. And I want to shoot him. I want to shoot him in the face. So Missouri is a bad liar because she knows that John is in Lawrence while Sam and Dean are in Lawrence, because John heard Dean's voicemail and went home. Didn't interact with his sons at all, but he listened. He came to Lawrence. So Missouri knows that John is there, and the very last scene of the episode is her coming back to her house, and it seems like she's talking to herself. Then we pan over, and there's John, and he's all, like, distraught, and he has a beard, and he looks the same age that he did 20 years ago. But, he has a beard. My final thoughts on this episode: it's not as boring as the last episode, but it is more boring than I remember. It definitely feels too long. This is where the 45-minute fatigue is hitting me. The cliffhangers at the ends of episodes are killing me. All of the plot is at the end of every episode, and I just, like, why? Why are you doing, why? Can you just, like, not? I'd say this episode gets a C from me. Yeah, so that's about it. Episode 10, Asylum. So this episode opens with exposition and some weird shenanigans in a haunted mental asylum. It's kind of like it's a cold open. That's what it is. It's not bad. I do like it. The episode starts with Dean blindly trusting what might be John, and Sam always questions John. He's always wondering if doing what John says is the right thing. With this argument that they have, we get to see a lot more of their relationship dynamic, where Dean is definitely more of a hard ass, and Sam, he's stubborn. They're both stubborn. But Sam is much more of a free thinker, where Dean, he wants to follow orders and listen to what his dad says. And something that upsets me is that because Sam is the main character, he gets a lot more of the characterization. just a small side note. My mom started watching Supernatural, and I asked her, which of the brothers do you like more? And she said Sam, and I asked why. And she said because he's the deeper character. I wanted to say, you're wrong. Come on. But I realized that she was right. Because Sam is the main character. He gets a lot more characterization. And he has a lot more depth. Dean is really just a soldier. There is some stuff under the surface, but it's really hidden. Because like we talked about a while ago, he's repressed. He hides a lot of his feelings and a lot of his characterization underneath jokes and law-abiding citizen. If John was the government. Something I wanted to talk about is a scene where Dean and Sam are in a bar trying to talk to this cop. And Dean goes in and he tries to be like, oh, I'm a reporter and I need this information, so you're going to tell me. And he kind of plays up the, like, rude, like, I'm just interrupting your night kind of thing. And Sam comes in and he plays, like, the hero. I don't know if anyone's seen How I Met Your Mother, but Barney and his brother, they have this play called The Hero and the Pig. It's a little bit different because they're not trying to go out with the cop. They're just trying to get information from him. But basically, Sam and Dean play Hero and the Pig, and it's great. I bring that up because when Sam pushes Dean away from the cop, he physically pushes him pretty hard. Dean actually, like, gives him an extra long stare, which could be read as, like, Dean being in character as the reporter and, like, hey, man, why are you pushing me so hard? I'm just trying to get some information for my story. But it could also be read as Dean looking at his little brother and be like, hey, that was really rough. And when Sam comes outside, Dean actually says, like, hey, you pushed me pretty hard in there, man. He says it as a joke. It's, like, jokingly, because he is never really serious unless he's alone. But he does call Sam out. I just wanted to bring it up because physical touch for these brothers is usually violent, or, like, pats on the shoulder. They don't really get hugs. They don't really hold hands with anybody. Like, when someone loves you and they're just trying to, like, make sure you're good, they kind of, like, pat you on the back, or they, like, rub your arm or something, like, just something sweet to physically let you know, like, hey, I'm right here. Dean and Sam don't really do that. The only touch they get is on their face from punching each other, or, like, a slap on the shoulder, just like a, like that. And that's true for the whole show. But it was specifically written that way because this show was made for white, red-blooded American men. And the two main characters are white, red-blooded American men. And men, as you know, don't touch each other. Ever. Because, having feelings, that's gay. It hurts. It hurts to even think that sometimes. Jesus. So the monster of the week this week is actually pretty interesting. On rewatch, for me, because I've seen this episode quite a few times, the story seems a little bit convenient. Like, oh, Dean and Sam are angry at each other and not talking about it, and they just so happen to face a monster this week that makes their anger come out. How convenient. We see at the beginning of the episode, Sam really disagrees with what Dean is doing, but he doesn't say anything. We get a shot where he just kind of, like he wants to say something really bad, but he is not saying it. And then at the end of the episode, he gets to say those things in a much harsher and rude way than he would actually say them if he were going to talk about his feelings. Because the ghost made him. Plot convenience. Yay. Sam mostly just talks about how angry he is with Dean because Dean is a soldier and not a person like Sam is. Before the last thing I want to talk about, I just want to bring up this shot. This shot right here. He went so hard. I love him. And then I also wanted to talk about a few nitpicks I had. So we see in the episode this shot of John's journal. We get 2 references to Wendigo, and now there's this page that has just appeared between the page with the Wendigo drawing and this newspaper clipping. Can we have some continuity in John's journal at the very least? They have a close-up of the page of John's journal, and in the first shot, which is earlier in the episode, we get a reference to Wendigo because the Wendigo page is there, but then also a page of a newspaper clipping for the case that they're working right now. In Wendigo, there was a page that had writing on it, no newspaper clipping, and in Asylum, that page of writing is gone, and then it shows back up later. Now, this is purely a nitpick. I honestly do not care that much. It was just, I was watching the episode, and I was like, I don't remember that newspaper clipping being there. I think it was just a continuity error. They had the journal, and they wanted to reference Wendigo, and they just were like, well, this is easy, let's just have the pages right next to each other. And then they were like, oh, there was a page in between there. Oh, well. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about Dean. At the very end of this episode, he is pretty smart. He gets Sam to monologue, and then he gives Sam a gun, and we're like, oh no, Sam's gonna shoot him. And we're also like, he's dumb, why'd you give him your gun? He's gonna kill you now. But then he uses that as like a diversion and gets the drop on Sam and knocks him out, because the gun didn't have any bullets in it, because Dean took out all the bullets. And then also, Dean just, like, saves himself while getting tortured by the ghost, but the only reason he got tortured is because he took too long to put salt and gas on the corpse. You can always just put salt and the gas on at the same time. You have 2 hands. By doing it one by one, you're just inviting the ghost to be like, nah, you know, like that is your fault if you get attacked because you decided to pour all the salt, put that down, pour all the gas, put that down, and then get your lighter and light that's your fault. Final thoughts on this episode. For first viewing, the writing is perfect. Everything flows and connects with the motions and the monster, unlike some episodes we talked about already, you know. But we end on yet another cliffhanger. I'm starting to understand the cliffhangers, though, because I realized, oh yeah, this show came out 15 years ago. This is season 1. These episodes were coming out week to week. They had to have a cliffhanger, because otherwise people would lose interest, because the story just takes so long to get going. And all of these episodes are like cute little small American folklore type things. And we gotta get them to keep watching somehow. Asylum gets a C. It would have gotten a B if rewatching it was more fun. Nah.